we are now going to invite the other speakers up and have a little bit of a panel discussion. Ooh, look, panel with Jad, with Jesse, and with Shruti. Um, I see there's literally one question for the panel. So if you want to add questions, I would encourage that. If not, what's going to happen? The panel discussion is even really that long. The panel discussion is about like 30 minutes. So if there's no questions, we can just kind of vibe out and just chat casually. I think that would even be more fun. So I'm gonna start actually with Jesse because again I was really inspired by your talk about security, mainly because security tends to be an afterthought, and I'm curious, kind of on your journey with security and code, what was there a moment where you were developing kind of like the rest of us, where it's kind of just an afterthought, and then you got really serious about that? What prompted that? Was it someone actually like hacking your thing and you're like, oh my gosh? And how did it feel? I'm curious if you could speak to that experience a little bit.
Definitely. I think so. Where I work, we're all about trying to build something that enables people to feel more empowered and make the best decisions when they're building, when they're just using web applications and being online and having to work using the internet. Like, how can we enable them to be as secure as possible? And it kind of, through understanding that and building the features for that, realized like, I don't know if I'm kind of doing the users the justice in order to keep them safe, and I don't know if I'm applying the advice that I'm kind of trying to provide just through the applications that we're building. And it kind of made me realize that I didn't know very much about it at all. And then lots of rabbit holes and lots of investigation and a lot of fun doing kind of like the interactive workshops you can do with regards to like secure development. So just a lot of exploration after realizing I didn't know it too much, because I think I come from a non-traditional background, and I did a software development bootcamp post-university to become a software engineer, and web application security wasn't touched in that at all, and it wasn't for a lot of the people that come through that non-traditional route. I know it's something that in computer science you would learn, but I didn't learn it at all, and so it made me realize kind of I'm trying to teach people how to be safe online, and I don't know if the thing I'm building for them is safe online. Of course, I haven't knowingly released anything vulnerable, but it's just kind of trying to understand, am I doing the best thing for these people all the time when I'm releasing things?
Wow, that's pretty serious that your bootcamp didn't cover security at all. Um, wow, that boot camp. God, hey, that's a note to everybody freaking running a boot camp here. Focus on security at least a little bit. So I hear that you come from this background where you did a boot camp, and part of your deep dive into security was also kind of having this almost advocate attitude for your users, where like, hey, I want to do right by them, and I want to be rooting for them and be their advocate. Similarly, Jad, from your talk, you tend to be, well, a performance consultant, but I assume with that comes some type of like willingness to serve users fast, to get things fast. As really, like, yes, having faster web experiences does make more money. There's an excellent article on web.dev titled "Milliseconds Make Millions." I highly recommend this article. Um, but I assume there's also an element there similar to Jesse's advocacy with security, your consulting being something to favor the developer. Is that accurate? And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the kind of the user experience focus of performance work.
Was that question towards me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost it a little bit because I was so interested by the article "Milliseconds Make Millions," so I was like Googling it. So can I ask you to repeat just the last part?
Sure. It's okay. I also don't pay attention to myself. The 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 question was, as Jesse mentioned, there was an element of feeling a sense of advocacy for users in terms of security, such that she wants to deep dive on security and really do these presentations to help companies and also herself be more sensitive to these needs of users. I'm curious, in your performance consulting work, if there's that similar kind of sense of service almost to the end users of the things that you consult with, to give them faster experiences. If you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's also not always about money, I would say, because in some cases it becomes even to the point accessibility, because if something is way too slow, then it becomes even inaccessible in some markets, on some devices. Yeah, I think also data usage is like data when you're on data saver mode, it's quite tricky because sometimes a page load might end up costing $1, $2 more, depending on the visitors. So yeah, for generally e-commerce, then performance is used to squeeze more money. But I think performance is essential for many other websites. Or imagine if I say it like this: if your bank takes a very long time to open, or once it's becoming not about like ordering food online, but once it becomes about more essential stuff, then this is where you feel that no, it's really a big problem if this is not fast.
Yeah, yeah, that's an excellent point. I think really all three talks in some way are relevant to the developer community watching, because be it performance or security, or even just, hey, here's let's build a thing and learn. Like, all three of these are so central to the work we do. If we just got a question from Kirill, I think really the one person watching the stream who keeps asking questions. Thank you, Kirill, for your questions. I'm curious who you'd like to address this question to. So if you haven't, since you haven't mentioned a name, rather, I'll just address it to Shruti. And then maybe if Jesse and Jad, if you have insights, I'd love for you to chime in as well. The question is, how do you handle the growing complexity of your code bases? I assume all of you have worked in a number of different code bases, some varying lengths, some with certain weights of legacy code, and things grow over time. So how then do you handle the growing complexity of these? We can start with Shruti and then have the others answer.
That's such a great question because honestly, I feel like once you are kind of developing a new feature, there's a lot of things that are unknown, right? Especially like with this Canvas thing, when I was first starting it, we used a Canvas at Slack as well, which is where I work right now. And so once I was first developing the feature, I had like no idea how to use Canvas, and the code that I was writing was like probably shitty, and I made it work. It was like a prototype phase. I made it work, and then I went back in. So I think one thing that I guess what I want to say is like in the beginning there's a lot of unknowns. You are prototyping, you're trying it out, seeing how it works, and then towards the end when you've seen that it's working and it's like at a good stage to ship it out to users, one thing you can do is before creating a pull request or even after creating a pull request, go back to the feature and see if you can refactor it a little bit and see if you can optimize it a little bit. I think in the beginning it's kind of hard to like think about optimizations, but once you know a little bit more about how it's working, what are the pain points, that's a good time to kind of write down like if there's any optimizations you can do, and go back in and optimize. So yeah, what I would say is in the beginning don't worry about all of that, but going back to your code and like handling tech debt as you're building product becomes easier instead of like going back a few months later, a few years later, and thinking about, oh, what the hell was going on here and why did I even do code this way. So building refactoring into your software development cycle, I think, helps in keeping the complexity low.
That's awesome. Yeah, I keep hearing this almost this mantra of make it work, make it right, make it fast.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like a lot of people think those are like quarterly things. Like, okay, I'm going to spend a quarter making it work, and then I'm going to spend a quarter making it right, and then I'm going to spend a quarter making it fast. But if you do it like that, I feel like by the time you're making it fast, you're like you don't even understand what's happening. At least this is my experience, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't remember code I wrote last week, honestly. And so I like what you say. Kind of do a favor to your future self, and one, write things in a way you're going to understand, but also keep that make it work, make it right, make it fast cycle pretty short, is what I heard.
Yeah.
To maintain, yeah. I'm curious, Jad, do you have any experience with that as well? Like, kind of dealing with growing complexity of code bases and legacy faux pas.
Yeah, it's really the same answer. I would just maybe slightly add that even if you're going to refactor it way later on, just write it down somewhere. So for me, I have a card, let's say a Trello card, not really Trello, but I have a card that says, these are the things that I'm going to refactor, because we always don't have time to reach them. But once you have time, you know where they are. Or maybe even the code, like add to do, you can do add refactor. Yeah, but just having a log of them somewhere does help, and making them weekly would be nice, like a Friday afternoon, like when you don't really have any capacity anymore, maybe it's nice to work on the easy refactorings.
Yeah. Jesse, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I love and didn't get an opportunity to talk about today, but testing, making sure you've got unit tests and end-to-end tests. And that way, even when the complexity grows and things are interacting in ways that you should be the first to know with those tests running. And it just helps so much. Like, I love the point about forgetting the code that you wrote last week, because the unit test should be able to do that for you, because I certainly wouldn't be able to either.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I feel like this though is a spectrum, because my fear now is people, myself included, I'm at risk of this, is take the things we just talked about and drive them to an extreme. If there's one thing I know about web developers, it's that we absolutely love extremes. For example, I know people who, will either be strongly, firmly in camp Tailwind CSS, or strongly, firmly in camp like just native CSS, and there's fights about these. So now my fear is people kind of leaning way towards the other direction, which is, oh my gosh, I'm going to annotate everything. I'm going to test everything, 100% test coverage, even if this code isn't used. And I do want to caution, hey, there's a middle ground. I think the general vibe is we try and write code that is reasonably optimized, such that when we come back to it, we kind of get it. And I want to emphasize that. Awesome. What do y'all feel about this ratio? Especially right now, we're seeing a strong adherence by most projects to be TypeScript. A lot of things are TypeScript first. A lot of educators, unless they're doing JavaScript tutorials, will do their tutorials with TypeScript. And personally, I find it to be this thing where it does prevent a whole class of mistakes and errors. Shruti, I noticed your thing was mostly JavaScript to begin with, and you didn't have any issues with it, which blew my mind. But I could not do live code without TypeScript because it helps me, prevent errors. I'm curious what y'all's take is on that. We can maybe start with Jad. Should we be kind of starting and doing things more with TypeScript because there's also performance implications, or like where do you stand on that topic?
I don't see any I think correlation between TypeScript and performance. For new projects, I would definitely start with TypeScript always. As an educator, actually, I always do JavaScript first because it makes it more accessible and also easier to learn. Because if you're learning a framework with TypeScript and you're not really good at both, I think that's quite tricky. So I do like to kind of separate them. So
Awesome.
On my courses, it's like JavaScript, and React is also without JavaScript. But it's actually quite a lot in demand. So many people are asking, when are you going to do a TypeScript course?
Yeah.
But then if you want to teach someone TypeScript, if they know JavaScript really well, then it should be easy to learn TypeScript because you have most of the modern features in JavaScript.
Yeah.
Except the typing part, of course.
Yeah, which even now there's a proposal to actually add those to JavaScript as well, except they don't behave as actual types. They just get written off as comments by the engine. But yeah, I see that coming closer and closer. Jesse, I have a question for you about this as well. Does TypeScript help prevent, because TypeScript does run ahead of time, right, at compile time. And I honestly haven't experienced this myself, but I'd be curious to know if TypeScript has like type safe rules in there that prevent kind of security faux pas. And this is kind of getting into lint territory. And the line indeed between TypeScript and linters can sometimes be a blurry one. So I'm curious, in your experience working with security, if you found instances where TypeScript will also warn or even outright error in case you're doing something very dangerous security-wise.
So I think it will definitely help the person spot where they might otherwise have some receive input that they're not expecting. And I think that process of like having to go through typing things can mean that you're being more considerate of the things you're doing with the things you're processing and how you're handling things. So I do think that it can help prevent security faux pas. I have also heard a lot about it not necessarily being as helpful as a lot of opinions say too. So I don't know. I'm not too sure if I'm pro or anti, but I'd say definitely have a read up on the ways, especially if you've only heard the dominant narrative, have a read up on the ways that it could also have negative impacts and effects on a project or where it might be superfluous.
Yeah, that's excellent. I wish, honestly, if I could like amplify one takeaway from every conference and this conference as well, is just, or this meetup rather, is there's always nuance, and to kind of explore for yourself where things are superfluous or not, a gift from the god of JavaScript, as it were. Shruti, I'm curious on, so I have a lived experience where TypeScript has made me a very productive and dare I say competent engineer. Mainly because most of my coding now with TypeScript is just I just press tab and lean on the autocomplete features. But kind of speaking to what you just said, Jesse, about nuance, there's also the other side of that coin, where it's made me lazy and incompetent in the way that I don't know stuff anymore. I just lean on auto completion and like code editor hints, and it's bad because like I don't remember basic APIs. Document.create element by ID. Like I don't get this anymore, and I used to. And some would say that's good because I'm devoting my brain capacity to other stuff. Some would say it's bad because these are things I should know. I'm curious, Shruti, as somebody who just wrote everything in JavaScript without, that many compiler or editor hints. I'm curious what your stance is on this. Like, is there potential for TypeScript to make us forget most of the things and lead on autocomplete? And is that healthy, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm a strong advocate for learning fundamentals first, and JavaScript is that fundamental that you should learn before learning TypeScript. And why I say that is because TypeScript will throw you these errors like, oh, you shouldn't have undefined, or like null is not a part of this. And so you go like, wait, I'm not even accepting undefined. Like, where is that coming from? And so like, I think like having JavaScript as the first thing that or like the first fundamental that you learn before learning TypeScript kind of helps you understand the types and how they're kind of like automatically, what is that called, coursing in JavaScript. So like in the code example that I was doing, one of the things that I did was I defined let x the variable, and then I like right away gave it a math.random value. What I didn't show you is that if I hadn't done that, I would have just given let x, and then in the function, I would have updated x plus whatever. That would have thrown a not a number value, and that's because JavaScript thinks of it as undefined, like the string, and then when it's trying to add, like it'll add the string undefined to a number, and then it'll say it's not a number. So no, like doing that in JavaScript will expose you to these errors, which you won't see if you are like removed from that layer. So I think having a fundamental layer of JavaScript definitely helps in understanding the types and appreciate TypeScript even more.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. So what I'm hearing is TypeScript can also help us not be so surprised. Indeed, I think that's very accurate. I don't. I've been surprised multiple times by JavaScript, where I did 11 plus 2 and got 112. And yeah, TypeScript definitely helps remove these. Awesome. We're going to wrap up the question and answer time, but I do have just one question for each of you, and I call these the most questions. And it's really, you gave talks about Canvas, which I'm going to consider because there was a part B to that, Shruti, where you talked about accessibility. I want to have you be the de facto accessibility expert here. So you gave a talk about Canvas and accessibility, and then Jesse, you gave a talk about security, and then Jad, you gave a talk about performance. So along these the most questions, I want to ask each of you in order, what is the most learnable moment you had with these domains? And learnable could mean multiple things. It could mean you saw something so bad, like done so poorly that you're like, oh my goodness, and then you learned a lot about how to do it better. Or it could be, you made a huge mistake and you learned. So generally learnable, I want you to think about it broadly and come up with an answer. I want to start with maybe Jad in the topic of performance. Yes, I see you panicking, but that's
I look more confused, and so you chose me.
but the question is, in the domain of performance, being a performance consultant, doing all of like living, breathing performance, what is the most learnable moment that you've experienced, either on behalf of a client or on yourself?
I don't know if this is the most learnable one, but this is the first one, the first realization. I think that if I come to a company and there's not really a performance culture, or that's even how I used to think, we would really zoom in on a code and say, maybe this for each is causing, like, it comes down to micro benchmark, micro optimizations that if you look at them, or yeah, like also using query selector versus get element by ID, and you have these metrics that this is faster, it really doesn't matter when you look at like just maybe switching a preload, removing a preload that changes half a second. This is where so I would just say usually, completely skip micro benchmark, micro optimizations, unless you are building a framework yourself. That's different.
Okay, that's really really valuable. And extremely, I think there's a lot of small teams where there's always that one guy who who's just like, no, we have to use this API because it's like 1% faster. I say this admittedly being that guy many years ago in the team, and
Yeah,
losing
I
many.
think this doesn't happen so often nowadays. It was years ago, but
Yeah, I recently saw a debate about the triple equal versus double equal in JavaScript. Some people saying the triple equal is faster, and indeed it is, but the double equal can be faster as well. And so, yes, I fully understand what you're saying. There's actually research been done on that, and the double equal is faster in cases where coercion doesn't happen. And I've got the numbers here as well to prove. Anyway, I got way too deep in that debate. But I hear you. Micro optimization probably isn't the thing unless you're building a framework. Heard it loud and clear. Thank you. That is very actionable for everybody listening. We'll go to Jesse next. Kind of the order of the speakers, accidentally or maybe not. Who knows? Jesse, your most learnable or teachable moment doing security work.
I think it probably was around the time of understanding the gravity of how damaging breaches can be. And if I think to like Cambridge Analytica and things like that, where things were done to users' data without their consent, and that data was available, for a lot of different reasons, but often you can think about how maybe in those initial sessions that users' data wasn't advocated for enough. And I think that and the consideration of how much power as engineers we have in maintaining safe applications for individuals.
Was that did you cause a breach at some point that taught you?
No, I
Yeah.
haven't, not yet. I've taken down production, but no breaches on my watch yet.
Good, good. Not yet. That's funny you mentioned. So I used to and Shruti, we're gonna come to you in a minute, but I'm gonna give you some time to think because the others have panicked a little bit. But I used to work at Spotify where it was a company with a really good culture. I have to say that. Because they used to have this thing called fail cakes, where one of our engineers dropped a production database for an internal service. So it wasn't like the Spotify music catalog or anything. Um, but accidentally dropped this database, and it was all fine. We restored a snapshot. Everything was good. But as you can imagine, she was absolutely terrified. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. It's such a bad thing, as any one of us would be. Come to find out, she comes to work the next day, and there's cake waiting for her to celebrate. Hey, listen, like you made a mistake. We all do, but let's celebrate because this isn't every mistake is a lesson, and so let's learn from this. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing. I fully imagine she had a very teachable moment that day,
Yeah, I
as
love that.
also probably did our infrastructure people to make databases undroppable. Um,
Yes, and that's a really good point. I think it's never the individual that kind of like causes the final action. It's not their responsibility alone. It should be like a culture of people who together have built this thing are all trying to like mitigate things together. So yeah, I love that. I love that. The infrastructure people should have hopefully learned and made it more resilient in future.
yeah, exactly. I see so many projects, open source or even within companies, where people will push to the main branch, and then you have maintainers going, "Oh, you shouldn't do that," but like there's other responsibilities to prevent pushing to the main branch as well. Yeah, I agree. It's almost never one person's fault, and I love that. All right, Shruti, you get to wrap up our Q&A panel discussion. with your most learnable, teachable moment, either with Canvas and web art, or with accessibility, since we talked about both topics?
I have like two. So I'll start with the first one. So with Canvas, actually, I was really amazed by how powerful Canvas is, and just not Canvas itself. Like I think like when we think of animations or drawing like these fancy graphics on the page, we immediately think of reaching for a library like Three.js or like D3.js, right? But then when we include a library, we're actually shipping so much code to our client side, right? So we're shipping this extra library for like maybe something small. So one thing that Canvas and working with this API has made me realize is like the HTML and JavaScript features that are available to us just out of the box are itself so powerful that we may not even need these libraries. So a learnable moment that I had is before I think about like reaching for a library, I'm going to look into the API documentation to see if there is something that's available out of the box instead of reaching for a library. So that's been my most learnable moment learning about Canvas. And not just animations, like Canvas can do so much more, right? Like you can do video manipulation real time with Canvas. Like you and I are talking, and like I can draw like maybe like an emoji on top of your face with just Canvas. So I think it's really powerful, and like HTML and CSS, it's like HTML and JavaScript and CSS as well provides us so much functionality, and we often don't think about them because we are immediate reaction is to reach for a library. So that's one. Number two is, did you have anything to say, Jad?
Yes, which emoji would you draw then?
I'm gonna draw a cow emoji because that's the only one I'm thinking of. I don't know why. I don't know why. It's
I guess I
fun.
do kind of qualify as a cow. I've got like spots, like different colors going on.
See, maybe that's why. And the second one is about accessibility, which I think like I made this faux pas as well, which is like when I was developing my own site, I realized after building the site after a long time that how inaccessible it was. Like I had this blog site, and I think I gave this demo in React Advanced London talk as well. But I had this blog site, and people who were using assistive technologies could not even like read any blog. So they would just go to the header, and then they would go ultimately to the bottom of the page. So like completely skip everything. And the reason I ended up with this is because I was like not using href tags correctly because I was using Tailwind. I was like super new to Tailwind. I didn't know how to do it correctly. But anyways, the point is like my entire site was completely inaccessible to people who were using assistive technologies. And one thing that I would say that I learned is like by not testing for inclusivity, you're actually excluding people from using your site. So I would just recommend like every time you build a feature, every time you build a site, make sure you're using keyboard navigation, which is just like just even your tab key to check if people can go through every element, every navigable box on the page, and using a screen reader to make sure that the labels are set correctly. Because if you're not consciously including people, you're actually subconsciously excluding people from navigating your site.
That's fantastic. What a great note to wrap it up on. Honestly, the first point you had about using the standard web libraries for things without necessarily reaching for external libraries hit a strong note with me, because I literally like 2 days ago or 3 days ago watched a talk by my good friend Una Kravitz, who works on the web platform, and her talk was titled "The Best JavaScript is No JavaScript," and then continued to do this 25-minute presentation with interactive slides like keyboard left right arrow keys and everything, with like inline demos, and that entire slide deck was just HTML and CSS without any JavaScript. It was fully interactive. You would never guess. So absolutely loved it. And I think Jad, you would appreciate that too, because then it's less JavaScript being sent over the wire, therefore faster performance. So that's an amazing point. And of course, the accessibility point, I have to appreciate that as well, because a lot of people, I've heard a lot of developers talk about how accessibility is in some cases for those people with disabilities or vision impairments, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think accessibility is for literally everyone, because I could actually have one of my best friends. My best friend is red green colorblind, and
Hmm.
I need the websites that he does, and all of us are in this together. In fact, when we tried to play Wordle, he just didn't know where the correct letter was, because it was green and he couldn't,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something that is not just for a few people, it's for everyone. So with that, thank you so much for all of your insights. It has been extremely valuable to have you here on this panel. And we're gonna call it here. And also thank you to the community watching for your questions. We really appreciate you. Thanks so much.
And thank you, Tejas, for being an amazing host.
It's definitely
For
my
Tejas.
pleasure. Wow, actual applause in a virtual event. Thanks a lot.